Oh, there she is. Baleen, welcome. We're just about ready to go live, so turn off your video and put yourself on mute till Bill introduces you about 6-7 minutes into the program. Welcome. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we're an integral part, with deep gratitude to all of our ancestors that have brought us to the present moment. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin today a 5-day program convened by Pachamama Alliance on the Amazon. All of us are acutely aware of the ravages of climate change that are disrupting our weather all around the world. Just last week, Pakistan was experiencing a deluge that put 1/6 of the entire landmass of Pakistan underwater. So everywhere in the world, climate change is disrupting the overall ecology, and yet our governments essentially refuse to take any kind of meaningful action, so that we, the people of the world, need to understand very deeply what's going on and how we can work together to ameliorate some of the challenges. And so for the next 5 days, we're going to be focusing on the lungs of the earth, the great Amazonian basin, but we're going to be doing it in a very particular way. Oftentimes when we think of the Amazon, we think of the forest and the rainforest and the various species, but what the Pachamama Alliance has done over the last 30 years, since its inception in 1996, is to bring to our collective attention the people of the Amazon who are holding sacred that larger ecology with a view of enabling people in the Western, northern worlds who haven't been familiar with the spirituality of the Amazonian people to be able to awaken to a new dream of where the eagle and the condor can fly together, where the indigenous people can share the indigenous mind in such a way that the people who have forgotten the earth and the forest and the living ecology can reanimate their souls. So that's the work and mission of the Pachamama Alliance, and we're very privileged to have them convene this 5-day program for us this week on Humanity Rising. Before we jump into this program, let us pause, as we always do, for some coherent breathing, which enables us to just bring ourselves into alignment, not only with ourselves, but with each other through a particular kind of breath that we practice here at Humanity Rising, which has been determined by scientists as the optimal way to balance all the systems that comprise the human body. The parasympathetic system, the sympathetic system, the heart, the mind, the brain, and it's 2 5.5 inhalations for 5.5 seconds, and then an exhalation for 5.5 seconds. And if you do this, you take in between 5 and 6 breaths a minute, and you bring into your body 5.5 liters of air. There's no better way to create coherence than breathing in a measured way for about 5-6 seconds in and 5-6 seconds out in a continuous way. So we're going to do this, and you're going to see on the screen as we breathe, just for 3 minutes. It's going to be about 15 breaths. The orbital path of the planet Venus and the Earth as they commingle their orbits around the sun, they create a 5-pointed star. And so it's worth just noting that as you're breathing in and you're breathing out to the count of 5, that you're replicating in your own way the 5-pointed star, which is the number of Venus, and also the number of the great goddesses, Aphrodite, Ishtar, Inanna in ancient Mesopotamia. So you're breathing in the mother. You're breathing out the mother. And Pachamama is the mother. So that this breathing isn't just abstract. This breathing is a replication of how we orbit the sun and how we revere the great mother. So Georg, why don't you start us off, and we'll breathe together for 3 minutes, and then we'll start our program. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. It's such a beautiful thing to breathe with the earth. and with the goddess of beauty and love, with the mother. That's what enables all of us to rise, not only internally, but together. It's my great honor, actually, and privilege to introduce my very good and old friend that I met way back during our Gorbachev days at the State of the World Forum, Bill Twist, who with his wife and partner, Lynne Twist, co-founded with John Perkins, who we'll hear from in a few minutes, and others, the Pachamama Alliance, as an impulse that came through some of the dreaming they were doing with the indigenous people in Ecuador, the Achuar tribe. And out of that came an impulse, as I indicated at the beginning, to enable people in the north who weren't part of the Amazonian basin and the Amazonian culture, and who were participating one way or another, either directly and indirectly, in the desecration of the Amazonian basin and watershed, to begin to animate themselves through the spirituality of Pachamama, as it's been carried for thousands and thousands of years by the indigenous peoples there, who have never forgotten and have never lost their contact. Bill, I want to welcome you this morning. He and Lynne will be co-convening the next 5 days and taking turns. And Bill's going to start us off today with a discussion of the Amazon and what's happening in that part of the world. So Bill, welcome to Humanity Rising. And I turn the program over to you. With many thanks, my good friend.
Great. Let's see. Can you hear me, Jim? I don't know if my video is on.
Yes, we can hear you, but your video isn't quite on yet.
Okay. I don't know if we need my video, but
oh, we need to see you if we possibly can.
Okay. There. Great.
There we go. There we go. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you, Jim. I want to start out. Thank you for making this space available to the Pachamama Alliance and for the work that we're doing. And we'll talk more, I guess at the end, we'll talk a little bit more about what's going to happen the rest of the week. I want to tell a little story on you first. So we started in 1995, actually, 27 years ago. And I think it was probably over at least 20 years ago, you came on a trip to the Amazon with us, you and your son, one of your sons.
Yes, Luke,
and
our oldest.
We did it. We ended up having an opportunity to do a ceremony at a local community with one of the shamans. And after the ceremony, you spent the whole night sitting in a lotus position on the bank of a river on a high overrise, looking the river. You spent the whole night there watching this river slowly go by. And I would come, Lynne and I would come over every once in a while and say, because everyone else had gone to bed and they were snug in their tents, in their mosquito nets. And Lynne and I would come by and check with you. And Jim, don't you maybe want to come in and get in your tent? No, you were fine. And you sat motionless the whole night. We were so impressed with that. And what happened out of that was you got malaria. Several days later, you came down with malaria. So I'm really honored that you're still willing to invite us to come and speak about our project after giving you malaria like that.
Well, it was my first experience with ayahuasca. That was the plant medicine that we took collectively, and it was such an extraordinarily powerful ceremony. And then being there in the Amazon in that way, I just felt I owed it to the forest to just sit quietly and listen to the river and the sounds of the jungle for that period of time, and it just went by so fast. And you're right, I did get malaria, but it was just part of the initiation, and it changed my life. It really opened me up to the deeper ecology in ways that I'd never experienced before. So I owe it to Pachamama Alliance and you and Lynne for making available that journey. And my son has never forgotten it, never forgotten it.
Well, we still do journeys similar to that. And we do take people, and often the indigenous people want to share that experience. They want to share with people who come with an open heart. They want to share the experience that comes from taking their plant medicines, ayahuasca and others that they use. But I think I don't think we've had anybody else get malaria since you. Maybe we learned from that. So you contributed to our methodology. Now
that was my initiation. That was my initiation. The mosquitoes are important too.
But that actually, so going back to kind of how Pachamama got started then, and this leads me into introducing John Perkins. In 1995, John had established a relationship working with some other nonprofits with my wife Lynne, and through a series of encounters, John organized a trip to go to the Amazon. And Lynne and I had a similar experience that Jim just talked about. And that experience really opened up and changed our lives too. The experience we had with working with indigenous people and their shamans and their wise elders. And John's the guy who really brought to the Pachamama Alliance and its creation that we're not just an environmental organization working to fix things in the Amazon, that we're an organization that knows that there's something deeply spiritual that's misaligned in our human species, and that's the source of the destruction we're doing to the natural world. And so Pachamama Alliance from the very beginning kind of had a two-part mission to partner with and work with indigenous people to protect their lands and culture, and from the lessons learned from that work to change the dream of the modern world. And that's something John brought to us. John at the time John's well known now for the work he does on the global economic system. John has got a long history of working with shamanism and working with indigenous people. And John really is the guy that set the DNA for the Pachamama Alliance. So I would love to ask John to talk about the beginnings, what you saw and what your experience from creating the Pachamama Alliance and what you see has come out of that now. John, are you there? I think you're still on mute.
I'm not on mute anymore, I don't think.
Great.
Thanks.
Great.
I want to start by saying that I lived in the Amazon with the Schwa as a Peace Corps volunteer back for 2 years, beginning in 1968, 69. And I've been going ever since, and I've never had malaria. So I wanted to be clear about that, because I've got a feeling there's people listening to this that were thinking of going on a trip with us, and they say, oh, well, I don't want to get malaria. But it's, you don't have to. I've been going for years and years, since 1968, as I said, when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and never had malaria. And then, as many listeners probably know, I was an economist. I became what we call an economic hitman. But after I got out of doing that, I'd done that for 10 years. Before that, I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer. And when I quit, my conscience finally got to me, and I understood what terrible things we were doing in the world, I went back to the people, the Shuar, who I had been a Peace Corps volunteer with, and said, I want to help you save your forest, because I knew that the rainforests were under attack. And they said something very interesting. They said, well, if you want to save these forests, don't come here and try to change us. We're not destroying the forests. You are. Your people are. Your demand for oil, your demand for minerals. But they said, most of all, it's your dream. You have a dream of big buildings and lots of industries and lots of cars. And it's that dream that's destroying these rainforests in the world. And so it's important that we get to change that dream. And that's what I started writing books about, changing the dream. The World is As You Dream It, Shape-Shifting, and other books on shamanism, and founded a nonprofit called Dream Change that we took people into the Amazon, and we did workshops, and we wrote books, and it was all about changing the dream. But during that period of time, the Achuar had been uncontacted. All the time I was a Peace Corps volunteer, they were officially uncontacted. A few missionaries had been in and visited them, but officially uncontacted. And then they began to understand that they had to reach out to what they call the modern world. And this is, as far as we know, and I know you say this, Bill, too, sometimes, that as far as we know, this is the first time, and perhaps the only time this has ever happened, that people who felt threatened by an enemy, which they saw as us, first the oil companies and then our dream of the world, decided that rather than fighting us or trying to run away from us, they had to reach out to us, embrace us, what they call touching the jaguar, touching that which they most fear in their visions. And they began to have dreams and visions about us and how they had to help us change the dream of the modern world. A dream that's destructive to the Amazon and to the planet Earth as we know it, to life on this earth. And it's not just about the environmental dream, it's about the socioeconomic dream, it's about social justice, it's about, as you mentioned earlier, the imbalance. And they saw this, and they saw that we were very unbalanced people. Oops, sorry about that. Technology strikes again. I thought it was off. They saw that we were a very unbalanced people, and they wanted it to help us change that dream. And my friend, who I'd been working with for many years, Daniel Cooperman, had gone out, and he was starting to spend time with the Achuar, these people that had been essentially uncontacted until well, the mid 70s, but they really began to reach out in the late 80s, early 90s when Daniel went there. And he invited me to come in and meet with the Achuar. And they said, you know, we'd like you to do what you've done with the Shuar, and that is to bring people here to learn from us and to bring our message out to the world, for us to become partners, for us to join a partnership with that which we most fear, which is you. your way of life, your economic system, your social system, your governmental system, everything that we now see breaking down so very, very much. And I resisted. I'd sat there night after night in the Achuar Lodge, drinking a lot of what's kind of a beer that they make out of manioc called chicha, and listening to one elder after another plead with me to do something, help us reach out to the world and help us convince the world and be partners with your people and help us all come together. And I kept resisting. And finally, Daniel, my friend Daniel Cooperman, one morning says to me, hey, you're going to have to agree with these people if you ever want to leave here. Now, that was hyperbole. I know they were not going to force us to stay. But he said, they control the canoes. You're going to have to agree. And I said, well, I can't agree because I don't think I can take this on. I'm already working with the Shuar, with this other organization, and I'm not doing a very good job. I'm overworked, and I'm not doing what I should be doing. I can't take on anything else. And he said, well, there must be someone who can. And he took me down by the river and he said, here, spend the day here, sitting here, meditating like Jim had done, I guess, except it wasn't at night, fortunately, so I didn't get a lot of mosquito bites. And as I sat there, I thought of Lynne, a twist. And she mentioned I spent time with her, with the Mayan people in Guatemala, and she'd had an amazing experience there. And I thought, well, if anybody can do this, Lynne can do it. And when I came back to the United States, I reached out to Lynne. I contacted her and found that she'd had this incredible experience while in Africa, where actually she had seen visions of the Achuar. She didn't know what she was seeing. It was terrifying for her in a way. She was very concerned, but that's another whole story that she can tell later if she wants to. But she explained to me, and she'd been very rich. She'd been trying to get in touch with me. I'd been in the Amazon, so she couldn't. But she explained that she'd seen these people with this paint on their faces, orange and black paint. And I said, well, that's the Achuar. They've been reaching out to you. And so basically she put together this group of people. I think there were 12, including you, Bill, and Lynne, and my daughter, Jessica, who was 12 at the time and had been to the Amazon before when it was kind of my assistant, and Daniel Cooperman. And then a bunch of people that at the end of the trip raised, I think it was around $120,000, and that was the beginning of the Pachamama Alliance. And it's an amazing history, and I'm going to let you take it from here, but I just want to repeat that, that message always was, yes, help us save these forests, but realize the only way that's going to happen is if your people become more balanced. If you connect your hearts and your minds, and that whole concept of the eagle and the condor, if you recognize that you are a part of nature, not apart from nature, that you are not supreme over nature, and you've got to do that with social justice, you've got to do that with environmental issues, you've got to do that with economic issues. It's the whole package. And that's when you stepped in, Bill.
Yeah, thank you, John. The what happened out of that, there were two things that I think are really significant. One was this idea of changing the dream of the modern world, that we weren't, the group that came down was not a group of people that had expertise in environmental issues or expertise in indigenous rights. But I think the group that Lynne put together and you put together was a group of people with really big open hearts and a willingness to learn and a willingness to try something new. I think what came away from that trip was that everyone realized that those of us who were on that trip kind of had as much to gain in ourselves personally from really digging in and creating a partnership with the indigenous people who had opened themselves to us and invited us. We had as much to gain as we had to give, maybe more to gain than we had to give, because we weren't experts in environmental issues. We weren't experts in indigenous rights issues. But we did what we could do to connect the people with experts. And I think that's one of the most important things we did at the beginning. And what came out of that was the Achuar formed alliances. We helped them form alliances with people who were experts in master planning for indigenous communities, people who are experts in mapping and land titling, people who are experts in lawyers who are experts in indigenous rights. And we gradually built a whole series of programs over the years that were designed for the Achuar to be empowered and to be capable of asserting their own rights and standing up for themselves. And the person who I'll say that was for the first 10 years of our existence, we worked building a whole network of projects in Ecuador and in northern Peru with the Achuar and then really all of the indigenous groups in the area. It wasn't until about 2005, that this request that they had made to change the dream of the modern world, that we figured out how to engage with that. And we're going to talk about that later in this week. The work that Pachamama Alliance does, not in the Amazon, not in the rainforest, working with indigenous communities, but the educational programs that we've developed to, as John put it initially, and the indigenous people requested, change the dream of the modern world. So that'll be something we'll come back to. It took, I'd say it took 10 years, 8 or 10 years working with indigenous people for us to get the confidence to say, we're going to step out and actually commit to doing what they had asked us to do at the very beginning. As you'll hear, we've had a very successful series of programs, and we're still pushing the boundaries in the work that we're doing to change the dream of the modern world. The programs that we did, though, we ended up creating a foundation in Ecuador called Fundación Pachamama, and that was created about a year after the trip that John took us on. And that foundation took on doing work with the indigenous people, bringing experts in, creating the capability for them to manage their education system, healthcare systems, their governance systems, legal systems. And that foundation, called Fundación Pachamama, was created in 1996. In 1997, Lynne joined us and has been managing that foundation for 25 years now. And that foundation probably has the broadest array of projects done with indigenous communities of any foundation working in the Western Amazon region, Ecuador and Peru. Lynne was a biologist before joining with us. She was working on, I remember I met her, she was working on a project to study the giant river otters that are in this territory, in Achuar territory in Ecuador, which is an absolutely pristine, untouched rainforest area with all of everything from jaguar, giant river otters, harpy eagles, the top of the food chain down to the billions and billions of insects and ants. Lynne's a biologist by training. She was trying to do a project studying the giant river otters. Actually, the Achuar rejected that project, but I met Lynne through that. They didn't want people coming in, and they were real skeptical of outsiders coming in and studying them in their territory. But I met Lynne at that time, and she's a woman with a huge amount of energy, the ability to handle 15 projects at the same time. And Lynne has been my partner for 25 years and manages all of the work that we do in the Amazon region. And I want to invite Lynne now to join us and to talk about the work that we are doing there. Lynne, are you?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, great. So this is Lynne, who manages all of the work that the Pachamama Alliance does in the Amazon.
Hi, everyone. Very nice to see you all here. I cannot have my video on. Someone needs to give me acceptance in the Zoom room. But I can start. I'm trying to open my video, but the guest of the Zoom room should do it.
Did you turn yours on your screen too, Lynne?
Yes, but it's not possible because it says that it's not possible to start the video because someone needs to give me the opening.
Uh-huh.
But well, I can start. I can start sharing some of the information. Okay, so now
There you go. Hey,
Hi,
Lynne.
Gil. Hi, John. Hi, Jim. Thank you very much to have us in this beautiful week and letting the people for your program know about more about Pachamama Alliance and the work we do around the world, but also in the work we do in the Amazon. So it's an honor, is an honor and a privilege to have the chance to share our work with many people around the different places around the world. And yes, when it was 97, I was going out from the university, and I was studying ecology at that time. And that was a good time to start doing my research on river otters, giant river otters in the Amazon. And since then, decades has been passing through this time, and everything has been very challenging and very interesting and very powerful, and also we have been able to witness what is happening in the Amazon regarding climate change, extractivism, seeing all the front lines full of guardians of the forest, our indigenous partners, environmentalist defenders, and we have also witnessed the changes that are possible to recreate and expand it for over the next 10, 20 years to protect permanently the Amazon. So the Fundación Pachamama has been created 25 years ago. Actually, this year we are going to celebrate our 25th anniversary in October this year. And this foundation in Ecuador was created to support the permanent protection of the Amazon basin and the indigenous territories in front of the expansion of extractive industries. Definitely, we are an organization based on human rights and nature rights principles. And we have promoted during these decades a resilient and innovative model that respects life, based on what we call in Espanol, buen vivir, or well-being, with an emphasis on the recognition and respect of human rights and the rights of nature, to generate the necessary conditions in which indigenous peoples strengthen their self-determination processes. So in order to do the work, we have been creating different programs. We have 5 programs really well anchored and very well organized and defined. One of these programs is dedicated to support indigenous organizations so they can have a strengthening to their self-determination and governance processes and inside of their territories and inside of these organizations. The other program has been dedicated to strengthen human rights and rights of nature. And also we have developed during the last 10, but with a lot of efforts in the last 5 years, our program on forest economies that is dedicated to support ecotourism projects and also sustainable production, bioenterprises and bioeconomy initiatives. And the other program that we really are proud of it is a program that is called Ikiama Nukuri, that works with maternal health care, and also very active now in advocacy and do a lot of lobbying in the Ecuadorian government and Peru to strengthen our program of climate change, forest and indigenous rights. The last 4 or 5 years, we have been very committed to give birth to a very large initiative that is called the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. We are partnering with over 30 indigenous nations in Ecuador and Peru to create this long-term vision of the permanent protection in the Amazon. You will listen more about this program, I think in the next days, when Atosa Soltani, our global coordinator, and Lee Twist will tell you more about the Sacred Headwaters. But let me just do a summary of our programs. Inside of the program of strengthening indigenous organizations, We support more than 15 indigenous organizations and nationalities in Ecuador, so they can have financial support, monthly financial support, to have their offices working in the cities of Puyo and Macas and Coca, where are cities out of the forest, so the leaders can do their work there. And so we support their local assemblies to strengthen their decision-making process of whatever they need in terms of execute their rights. We do a lot of studies and research, communication, media related to indigenous collective rights. And next, by this strengthening of capacities and training them about the collective rights and any kind of information they need to protect their territories, we have a group of lawyers that are like working very hard to litigate cases at the national and the international level. So these rights of collective rights, human rights, are going to be really well respected in the Amazon and in our country, in Ecuador and Peru. So what we do in this program is develop national and regional jurisprudence and public policies where human rights and the rights of nature are guaranteed. We do a lot of legal support for indigenous organizations and communities to defend their rights. And we definitely work to strengthen the organizational capacities of the Amazon indigenous communities. So we have been winning several cases in the Inter-American Court in front of oil interests, oil development projects interests, and also in front of the government. And these cases, as the Sarayaku case that has been won in 2 courts, international courts, has been able to open a jurisprudence so the indigenous people can have a proper free prior consent consultation, while some projects of oil or mining can come into their territories. In order to do this work, we do a lot of advocacy and lobbying with the governments, with the Minister of Environment of Ecuador, with the Minister of Finances, and even the Presidency of Ecuador. So we do a lot of participation in local and regional platforms, and we have been creating spaces to work with the government. Nowadays, we are participating as civil society organizations in different spaces where we interact with the government, mostly now in terms of in aspects of, on climate change and for reducing and deforestation and degradation. So we are creating a collaborative work with the local governments and indigenous peoples and the government itself, so we can see the best way to reduce deforestation in Ecuador and have a better commitment to reduce the targets of deforestation in Ecuador and have a good performance in terms of a global situation on forests and protection of their forests. But also in the midterms, we are also ratifying the importance of the participation of indigenous peoples in these conversations of climate change, that nowadays these conversations are such a privilege, because just the people to attend the climate change conferences and the climate change conventions are able to know about all these concepts and technicalities about carbon, about climate change, yes, commitments from different governments. But the people that is really protecting the forest to provide climate stability to the world are the indigenous people that are based in these territories that we work. So we need to like bring information for them to have equal conversations with the government, not information that is just like information of power and privilege, but the information that indigenous people can bring into the table of negotiations so they can be respected, informed, and also that they can have benefits, the proper benefit sharings to implement their life plans in their territories. In order to do their life plans, we have designed a beautiful program that is called Forest Economies Program, that develop initiatives in the Amazon that strengthens value change under the principles of fair trade and zero deforestation. We promote the conservation and restoration of forests, and we promote the improvement of the livelihoods in the communities, improving the, topics about food security and maintenance of community livelihoods. So we are working recently with vanilla, with Amazon cinnamon, with aguaje and other superfoods from the forest, white cacao, banana, cassava, manioc. And we have been really also successful working with ecotourism. So I would like you and the people who's listening to us to be able to check our journey programs under the Pachamama Alliance program. So anytime you are able to meet us in the Amazon, will be a privilege and an honor to meet you here in the Amazon, to expand the work that we are doing and to commit all this big community around the world to protect and save the Amazon for the rest of for the next years and for the next generations. For now, that would be what I would like to share. So it has been a beautiful journey these last 25 years to work with the Pachamama Alliance. Thank you.
Lynne, thank you very much. I want to also, as Jim talked about at the beginning of this session, how critical the Amazon is and how the world is really focusing on the Amazon rainforest. We work in the far western edges of the Amazon rainforest. We work in this area that Belen has identified as the sacred headwaters region. So in Ecuador and Peru, and we work there not because we thought this up. The Pachamama Alliance exists there because we were invited somehow 27 years ago to come into this area and work with the indigenous people in that area. It ends up that the region that we were invited to in Ecuador is the most biodiverse part of the entire Amazon basin, maybe the most biodiverse part of the entire world. And what's happened is, and the conditions, the way I see it now is we were invited there because the conditions were right for the world to come in. And if the world was going to focus in some place to have success working in partnership with indigenous people and developing strategies to protect nature, to restore life on this planet, this was like the perfect spot to do it. The forests are protected, they're under threat, but they haven't been destroyed. It's not like what's happening in so much of the Amazon that we hear so much about in Brazil in particular, where it's huge fires, it's being cleared for agriculture. The cattle ranching, agriculture production is putting a huge threat on the rainforest. In this area, it's actually manageable. The indigenous people are really strong and organized and know their rights and assert their rights. And so there's a possibility for a real victory here that can spread and be an example for the rest of the Amazon region. The Sacred Headwaters initiative that Glenn mentioned, we'll talk about in another couple of days, but it's being watched by the indigenous organizations that coordinate all of the Amazonian indigenous people are intimately involved with that project because they think that this area could be a model for how to protect the Amazon and the rest of the Amazon basin. I want to say something that's unique about the Pachamama Alliance also is that all of our funding, 95% of our funding comes from individuals. It comes from individuals, many of whom have been on the trip that Glenn just invited you all to go on. But it comes from individuals who fund from their heart. And it gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility to do things quickly, to experiment with new ideas. And as a result, we've done some amazingly innovative projects in this area that have provided the basis for the success that we've built over the years working with the indigenous people. One of the first projects we did when we were invited in, was we helped the Achuar create their own language as a written language. And there was a linguist from Italy who'd been in Achuar territory 10 years before we were there. And we found him and brought him to work with the Achuar to create their language as a written language. They didn't have a written language. They were learning to speak Spanish. They had a Spanish alphabet. So it was possible to phonetically sound out their language into be a written language. The critical thing about that was that then they could teach their kids. They could have a formal education system in their own language rather than being led to Spanish is what they were being led to. And I think that was a project. We never could have sold that. It would have been hard to selling that to a big foundation, and it would have taken a long time. And we just did it because we had the money. We had donors who loved the idea. And that was I think that was one of the first projects we did that set this sort of the style and standard for what we were willing to work on. The project that Lynne talked about called Ikeyama Nukuri, which is a health project, it's actually a project that's aimed at improving birthing techniques and treatment of maternal health and newborn health in Achuar territory. And that project was created and funded by a midwife who came on one of the journeys that we were talking about. And that project was a really radical that's had a very far-reaching impact in Achuar territory. Clearly, it's made a big difference to maternal health and newborn health. But what it's really done is it's empowered the women in the Achuar communities. The Achuar culture is a warrior's culture. 40 years ago, they were at war in Achuar territory and war with their neighbors. And in that kind of a culture, it becomes very, very patriarchal. Women don't have a strong role in the outside representation of their culture. But with the Ikeyama Nukuri program, it naturally started elevating gave a sense of empowerment to the women, where they started stepping out, taking much more of a role in external political activities of their nation. And in fact, in the last Congress of leaders that were elected, a woman was elected vice president, which was an unprecedented thing. But the innovation that Pachamama Alliance from Fundación Pachamama was able to bring to the healthcare system had the effect of really empowering women in this territory, and empowering women certainly in indigenous territories. In many, they're already empowered, and some they're not. It's critical around the world to address climate change, to take care of our earth. Women are the strongest voice in doing that. Two other things that came about because of the way Pachamama Alliance and Fundación Pachamama were funded, and the role that having individual funding brings, because individual funding, at least for us, has been general operating funds. However we want to use it, we're empowered to use it. And what we did was we played the major role. Because of that, we played the major role in inviting in, when the Constitution of Ecuador was being rewritten in 2008, we had the ability to take money and bring people down from the United States and from around the world to Ecuador to work on getting rights of nature into that Constitution. That ended up being picked up by the indigenous people and by the people in Ecuador who were really driving that Constitution. But we spent $50,000 to bring people in to jumpstart that thing, which we never could have done, except that our funding came from individuals and the love and support and confidence and the trust in giving us the freedom to try crazy things. That could have gone nowhere. In fact, most people, even the people when we were inviting them to come down to work in Ecuador, they thought it was going to go nowhere. But it obviously made a huge difference because Ecuador ended up being the first country to put rights of nature in its constitution. And we've been, and through Fundación Pachamama, have been the supporters of a global alliance for the rights of nature that's grown out of that. And we'll hear more about that, I think, in tomorrow's session. We also, the Sacred Headwaters Initiative that Lynne talked about, that's an initiative working with 30 indigenous nations that has one of the partners in that being the government. And to be able to be an organization that both can put pressure on the government, support the indigenous people, and work with the government takes a certain amount of skill that Belen brings and represents constantly. But thinking about pulling 30 nations together across 2 countries, organized by a watershed, most of the foundations that we talked to about that had no interest in it. And I think it's going to be, and it's grown now for 5 years. It's a major initiative, probably the biggest initiative, indigenous-led initiative, addressing climate change, addressing rainforest preservation in the world. And that project is a project that came about because of the money and the freedom that we have from the love from the personal fundraising that's been the model for our organization. Let's see. That's John. I want to come back and give you a chance to add again whatever you want to throw in about what's been unique and what's the direction the Pachamama Alliance and Fundación Pachamama have been going in our work in the Amazon. And then I'll let Glenn say something again, and then we'll bring Jim back in. But John, why don't you add whatever you have to add that we've missed so far?
Well, I don't think you've missed much, Bill and Belen. Thank you both so much for all of that. I would just add that I never would have possibly, in my wildest imagination, believed that this would have happened the way it did. When I'm sitting there night after night in that Achwa Lodge back, I think it was 93 or 94, listening to them asking us to form a partnership. Like, yeah, right. And, you know, it's been magical. And you, Bill, have done so much to make that happen, and Lynne and the fundraising, and Belen from the Ecuador side, and all the people that have contributed money and effort and time and have gone on these trips. And I don't think there's any better learning experience than these trips. We just came back from one. So for those listening to three, Bill and Belen and Danielle and Sarah Vetter and Lynne Twist and I were leading a trip of, I think there were 17 other people. And I'm in New Hampshire now, where I grew up. And in the forests of New Hampshire, I came from the forests of the Amazon to the forests of New Hampshire. And it's just a reminder of how interconnected we all are. These trees here are connected with those trees down there. We're all breathing air that comes from these trees. The water that we drink and that we use for so many different things is part of all of this incredible system. And there's no place like the sacred headwaters of the Amazon that teaches us better or more about how important it is to be the lungs and the heart of the earth. And to think that in the last 27 years, it's like the impossible has happened. And I wrote the book, The World Is As You Dream It. So I guess the Amazon, the Achwa had a dream, and they manifested it. And through them, I had a dream, and then Bill and Belen had dreams, and Lynne had a dream, and many, many other people, and many of those of you who are listening have had this dream, and many of you have been with us on these trips. And so this dream is happening. And right now we're seeing tremendous turmoil on our planet. We're being shaken up. But that's part of the prophecy of the eagle and the condor, the many different prophecies that come out of so many different cultures have told us that we would enter a time of extreme crises, and that those crises would be here to shake us awake. But it's up to us to take the actions. And I, for one, am just so proud to be part of an organization that's so deeply, deeply involved in taking actions, changing the dream of the modern world, and then promoting the actions and taking the actions that make that happen. And so you've heard a lot today about a number of the actions that are being taken. These are, I think I travel around the world a lot. I speak at many different venues and places like China and Kazakhstan, which is where President Putin and Xi are apparently going to meet this next week, and Russia and all over Latin America and the United States. And everywhere I go, I find that people know about the Pachamama Alliance, and they've taken our programs. And who knows how many other people that reaches out to. So this message that came out of the rainforest back all those years ago has become truly global. It's just enveloping this whole Pachamama. And I'm grateful, and I'm really grateful to you, Belen, and to you, Bill, and to Lynn and Sarah, and to all the indigenous people that have participated in this, and all of you out there who are part of our incredible partnership. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. Lynne, do you have some things that something you didn't say you'd like to say, or anything else you'd like to say?
Maybe to remind the people who's listening to us that the indigenous movement in Ecuador as a political group is a very important force, and they have been able to reach the presidents. Sometimes they have been able to take out the presidents out of their role because they have not been listening to their demands and what they have been trying to express to the society. And very recently, there was also a demonstration of indigenous peoples in the streets. They were coming from all over Ecuador to Quito, the capital, and they were asking for very specific things that are related with climate change, with food sovereignty, with oil extraction, with external debt. And the government has opened a table of negotiation with indigenous groups in Ecuador, and they had not been able the last 90 days to get into a place where all these different demands has been answered in a proper way from the government perspective. So I see that in the future there will be more and more perhaps evidence that this lack of communication and willing to start going into this transitional pathway to protect life on Earth, to have a different model of economics that is not destroying the Amazon, but is including indigenous peoples and bioeconomy as the first way to do the new transition to an ecological civilization in Ecuador. Until that will not be happening genuinely from the governments, and this conversation has not been more clear and open, indigenous people will be again and again in the streets of Quito to ask what is just. So I believe one of my hopes is that indigenous peoples are going to be able to, they are not just speaking about themselves, but they are speaking about the society in general in Ecuador. And that makes me, to me, that makes me, give me hope to have them as partners, because they are really strong. They have a lot of wisdom. They know how to organize themselves in a way that no one can do it in Ecuador. So to me, I see possibilities to protect the Amazon permanently in the next 10 years because of their strength and their dreams about permanent protection.
Well, yeah, thank you, Belen. You know, one of the things that I've noticed about the Sacred Headwaters Initiative and the direction it's going, and I know there were some meetings just recently where I think a new phase of it developed, and where it's really going, if it's successful, it won't need a bunch of outsiders. It won't need outsiders necessarily working with it or guiding it. The indigenous people will create a new structure where they have the ability to manage their territory and themselves. They'll bring the outsiders in when they need expertise. But the possibility for the sacred headwaters, for the indigenous people of this area to actually end up being totally autonomous and responsible for their area, and responsible not just for themselves, but for all the people of the Sacred Headwaters region and all the people of Ecuador and Peru. I think there is a huge possibility, and we'll talk about Sacred Headwaters project in a couple of days. Hey, Jim, do you have questions that have come up that you want to introduce or add, or anything you want to direct us
Well,
to?
thank you, Bill. Thank you, John. Thank you, Balin. I think in the first instance, I'd love to hear more of your story, Balin. How did you get involved with Pachamama? Presumably, you're Ecuadorian?
Yes.
You're living in Quito. Tell us a little bit more about your background and your story. We know a lot about John and Bill, but we'd just love to hear your story and how you got involved in this work.
Thank you, Jim. When I was studying at the university in Quito, Universidad San Francisco de Quito, I was able to go to visit national reserve that is called Cuyabeno in the north of the Amazon in Ecuador, and I had a really moment of inspiration, and I was, I guess, 24 years old, and because I was always passionate about aquatic mammals, I went into the lagoon of this place that is called Cuyabeno Lagoon, and when I was in this canoe, I had the chance to see. I'll say it was like a gold dust coming out from the forest while I was in the canoe paddling. It was 5 p.m. I was like with dolphins around, and I had a sensation that something was trying to reach me or to calling me. And I listened to myself saying, yes, I will do this forever, and I will be protecting you, and you will be protecting me, and that's my deal for you and my commitment. So since that really short moment of my mystical moment in life, I never had the questions or doubts about what's the role of myself in this commitment to protect the forest and to know more about myself and how to heal the indigenous peoples hand by hand. So since then, I've been like really blessed in order to have a very organic way to work and open my knowledge and commitment and relationship and friendship with indigenous peoples. So it has been easy in a way to me to get into this canoe all over around the years on the Amazon and the forest, different forests, different communities, and just be open to learn about the forest and the spirits from the forest and the living forest has been very helpful to me in my heart to give me a lot of guidance in order to do the work that we do in action, in the action way to say in our projects in the ground. So it has been a beautiful learning process to meet indigenous peoples and how to dream, how to be involved with the ceremonial plans. And from that place of openness and listening about the spirits from the forest has been much more easy to face all the destruction and all the challenges that as a environmental defender in Ecuador, I have been able to experience also, but I have all this context that helps a lot to do the work that we do here.
Hey,
Beautiful.
Jim, let me add something too. So Glenn is also, when younger, trained in opera singing. So she has a beautiful voice. And the main way that shows up now is when we're out in the forest, sometimes we're doing ceremonies, Belen will sing, and it's heavenly, it's ethereal, It's just beautiful. So she adds that along with her capability of administering and driving projects. She has the ability to create this ethereal audio sounds that transport people.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And, you know, to come into your awareness with gold dust coming down out of the heavens upon you, Lynne, is one of the most extraordinary stories of mystical awakening I've heard in some time. So you're very gifted by nature to have that kind of wake-up call that was so affirming and so natural. You know, the question I'd like to ask you, and then also to you, John and Bill, since you've been at it for so long, is how has this whole process changed the indigenous tribes down there in Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, and the different places in which you're working? Because you're thinking, you know, here you have Stone Age cultures that had no real contact with modernity at all. And all of a sudden, they're caught up both in the encroachment of modernity that is desecrating their natural habitat, but also they're being empowered simultaneously to fight back and to organize. And now they're organizing across borders. So I'd be very interested, Lynne, and John and Bill, in your experience of how, for example, the Achuar there in Ecuador, how have they changed as a tribe? How have they changed as a culture as they've moved into the 21st century with all the technology, politics, and alliance systems that have developed over time?
Do you want to say something, Belen?
Well, I can say something. Yes, I it's like I've been witnessing how they have been growing and maturing as a collective in a way that no one maybe has thought that was happening when we met them 25 years ago, 20 years ago, even 15, 10 years ago. This evolution in front of these challenges that were destroying their lands and territories and not respecting their rights. They have been like becoming a really wise collective. They are not very individuals. They are still very, that they have an intelligence, collective intelligence, and they have very powerful leaders now that are attending to all these conversations globally on climate change. They are now like in political positions in the local governments, indigenous movement, as I said, in Ecuador, they are in the front lines in these first, like in these, not negotiations, but letting the government know that something is not wrong, that there's not enough equity and balance in any way in the access of resources or natural resources. So I think it's just amazing how they have developed this intelligence that led them being one of the first actors in the region, in the Amazon basin. They now are very well heard. They are now very well respected. People want to be more closer to them, to understand about their dreams, about their culture. There is something about their knowledge on healing that also people is awakening around the world, and they would love to go and see shamans or to go and see the forest and experience themselves healing. So I think it's something happening with indigenous peoples that are not longer out there trying to protect themselves, but now they are definitely a political actor for all the world and for humanity in the next generations.
Yeah, so they've participated in all the machinations of politics and ecology of modernity, but they haven't lost their roots. I would imagine that they've been empowered to keep connected to their wellspring of their culture, because they are probably realizing that that's that's a rare and sought after commodity around the world.
I think, Jim, it's even, I mean, I would agree totally with what Belen's saying, what Belen has said, and that I think even somehow they're even more certain now in their connection, their connection to the way they see the world, the way they know that the world is an animated place with information that inspires them, their spirits everywhere. That's their tradition. They know that they're even stronger now in that, because they see that what's actually the problem is the fact that the rest of the world doesn't see that, and how divorced the Western world is from that. And I think they're getting the skills to be able to talk the language with the Western people. They go to the COP, they go to the climate conferences, they go all around the world. And I think it's actually even strengthening strengthens their knowledge of how the world works, and they're getting better at then being able to translate it to other people too.
Brilliant.
What
would you say?
I would just add to that I think, you know, it amazes me how quickly they learn to use computers, the internet, you know, and when they come out, when we bring them to other places, and they're very quick to tie into our technology. At the same time, as both Belen and Bill have said, they've maintained that they're feeling that they are not apart from, but a part of nature. And how do you use this technology to convince the rest of the world that we need to all feel that we're not superior humans above nature, that we control it, that we somehow have to use it and exploit it, but that we have to live within it and as a part of it. And they've also kept their commitment to the long term. And, you know, as an economist, you know, my training was short-term profits, you know, maximize short-term profits. That's what the economic world is all about. That's what the business world is all about. And we've got to change that. They don't buy into that at all. It's like, let's use these technologies for the long term. Let's take care of our children and our children's children, and not just human children, but the children of all those trees that are behind me and behind you there, Jim. And let's take care of all the insects and all the all the birds and the animals and the mosquitoes too. And, you know, it's in the long term, we've got to look to the long term. So even though they're able to, the same technologies that we buy into to enhance short-term profits and short-term maximization of consumerism and all these things, they use that same technology to try to enhance and protect the long-term survival of life on this planet as we know it. And that's magnificent. As such, they're incredible teachers. They've been amazing teachers to me, and I think their example is something that it is it's important for the world to see and feel that way that we can use modern technology to enhance the long term.
Yeah. And then just a final quick question on the other side, starting with you, Belen. You know, the let's say the Ecuadorian, Peruvian governments with which you're working, contrasting, for example, with Brazil, where Bolsonaro seems to be ramping up the desecration of the Amazonian basin there in Brazil with increased encroachment and burning of the forest, etc. Are you finding in Ecuador and, say, Peru, where the sacred headwaters, the tribes are getting together, are the governments more and more responsive, or are the major global oil companies, etc., putting increasing pressure on the governments against what the indigenous people are seeking? What's the current state of play there between the governments and the indigenous peoples?
Well, in one hand, definitely oil companies and now mining companies are really putting a lot of pressure and budget to maintain the society informed about the benefits of oil expansion or their oil economies, mining economies. And that's something that is an ongoing process that is not changing at all. Is expanding into very biodiverse areas. It's like destroying a lot of forests. But in the other hand, I see that at least people that I know in the government, the ministers of environment, subsecretaries of climate change, people who's working for adaptation, especially the people who's working for conservation in the governments, are people that they have a really clear understanding on what is needed. They are putting all of their efforts to put in papers in the public policies, what are the needs and the targets and the commitments that Ecuador and Peru needs to do in order to go into this different kind of economy that is not destroying life in the Amazon, but instead of that is creating new possibilities, restoring, reforestating, doing bioeconomy projects in these areas. And I see that this will take a time to have a very final committed policies that understand an economic transition of what we call transitional pathways, where our states, Amazonic states from the 9 countries of the Amazon basin, are going to see that there is not other way to create a transition for the permanent protection of the Amazon, that will like what I want to say is that the governments will have income coming from the forest if they are going to be live forest. So it's very important for the governments to have a plan in order to do that. And I think the key role of Fundación Pachamama and the indigenous movement, at least from Ecuador and Peru, is to bring that strength to the governments and to the local governments and to the private sector that will join us into this collaboration effort, that they will see that there is a possible economy that will come because we are protecting forests, because the forests are alive. And I think there's a lot of chance to have a lot of money to get into a place where it's not needed to have more oil development and mining development in these territories.
Good, thank you. It seems like it's the same struggle everywhere. Bill, John, do you want to make any quick final comments?
Well, I would just say, I think we all ought to understand how much responsibility we all take, because we're the ones who use the oil
Good point.
and the minerals. And here's a country that has a lot of extremely poor people living in the mountains and on the coast, one of the heaviest, most densely populated areas in the world. And they want to see the country provide oil and minerals so they can have better health and care and education and so forth. So I think what Lynne is getting at, and I know what Bill has been working on very strongly, is how do we come up with a system that can actually pay the country enough money to substitute for oil and minerals. And one of the things that we've been looking at is carbon offsets and various other things that I think is going to come up later in this program. I think Bill will talk more about that later. But I think it really is very, very important that we in the United States and Europe and in the higher income countries recognize that this is really a problem we've created, because we don't want to drill for oil off the coast of California. We don't want to pollute our country, so let's go and pollute Ecuador. And I think that's an attitude that's very, very important to own up to and to overcome.
Yeah, very good point. Do it in somebody else's backyard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are working hard to overcome that. I don't want to end on a negative note. There's a lot of positive actions in this regard, and that's the hope, and that we move forward and that to a new dream. Yeah,
exactly. Bill, why don't you give us a final word and then say something also about tomorrow's program?
Okay, well, I'll just say this topic we're on right now, I think we'll get into a little bit on Wednesday's program when we talk about the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative, because the idea is with that initiative is to build the foundations for an ecological civilization. And that means we're going to have to come up with, and the world's going to have to come up with ways of financing itself, or paying for the human and natural development, nature's preservation and development. We're going to have to come up with ways to do it that don't rely on obviously oil, mining, extractive industries. And we're looking, and that's sort of part of the model that we're looking at within the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. And I think there's real progress being made. I mean, people around the world, not just in this area, but around the world, I think are being really creative at coming up with ways to see how do we get to a place where we're restoring life, where the main premise or the main orientation is to restore and regenerate life on this planet, and do it in a way and pay for it. But paying for it, we're discovering we have a lot of flexibility in how we pay for things. We can just create the means to pay for things. And so we may need to look deeply at the premises behind which how we put money into circulation. And that's kind of what's going on with the Sacred Headwaters region, looking at the whole thing. So I'm optimistic that there's great work being done that would potentially create models for how do we protect nature, live in harmony with it, and provide for the sustenance and flourishing of not just the human species, but all species. So that's kind of what we're doing with the Sacred Headwaters Initiative. That's Wednesday. Tomorrow's session is a session about the rights of nature. And that was nature having legal rights is something that emerged out of this work that done in Ecuador in 2007 and 8, and ended up being in the Constitution in Ecuador, that nature is a rights-bearing entity with the right to persist and flourish and regenerate. And that's something that's now started a movement, accelerated a movement around the world that's totally consistent with the indigenous view of the world. Indigenous is actually one of the first hurdles to get over with that. When the idea came up of let's create rights of nature, the indigenous people, initially many were like, oh, give me a break. White people you're gonna give rights to nature. Nature doesn't need rights. But then when they really got into it and saw that what was allowing white people or outsiders to destroy nature was the legal system that had been created. So if we can change the dials there, maybe that gives us the tools to really do what we need to do to protect and honor our relationship with nature, our responsibility to nature. So tomorrow's session, Natalie Green, who is the coordinator of the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, and Cormac Cullinan. Cormac is a lawyer from South Africa who's been one of the real leaders in the vanguard looking at wild law. Originally he called wild law, rights of nature. Those two will be in a discussion about kind of what the history is, how we came to having rights of nature as a possibility in our legal structures, what's happened over the last 12, 14 years since Ecuador put it into its constitution, where it is, what's the status of this around the world now, and then where's they see it going. So I think it'll be an exciting and very informative conversation.
Boy, thank you all so much. Balin, thank you. You're an inspiration. I keep thinking of the gold dust. May gold dust sprinkle all of us today through you in an inspiration to do better on behalf of Pachamama. And John, it's always a pleasure. You're such an encyclopedic reservoir of politics, economics, and shamanic, all wrapped in a deep compassion for the earth. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for the way you presenced yourself and the need for a whole new dream over the years. It's been an inspiration to me. And Bill, what you and Lynn have done with John and others through Pachamama has been nothing short of miraculous, and it's given possibility for a whole new way of understanding our relationship with nature. So I just want to thank all of you in the spirit of the gold dust. And that brings our session to a close, everyone. This has been the first of a 5-part program this week on Humanity Rising, convened by Pachamama Alliance. You're all welcome to join the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. And then we'll see everyone here again tomorrow, same time, same station, for a deeper exploration into the rights of nature that Pachamama and others have developed over the last 10, 15 years. Thank you, everyone. Bill, John, Balin, thank you so much. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye,
Jim.
everyone.
Thanks for all you
Have a
do.
great
Jim.